Brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that supports life and family. 5% of your monthly plan price goes to your favorite charity. Buy the way you believe at CharityMobile.com and use promo code TRADITION.
What I have for you today is the postscript from Michael Davies' book, Modernism. We had been working through that together until about a year ago. But in my recent move to my new office space, I found my copy of it and found that we had left the last bit of the book, which we'll now go over together. It's the postscript written by Graham Morehouse, the chairman of the Pro Ecclesiae Pontifice. Here he describes a series of problems that are undermining the church. And the next pope, God willing, he is a good one who listens to the will of God as best he can, and then attempts to implement that instead of coming to the office with his own preconceived political notions of what the Pope should be. Hopefully, he will do something about what you're about to hear. And this on the surface sounds like an argument against communion in the hand. It only begins with that subject, and it's not even so much about communion in the hand as it is about what happens to people who are dedicated to doing things Catholics have always done things. Here is something I think that is good to be thinking about as a conclave begins. I have a friend, a diminutive black lady. Her name is Rose. I am proud to call Rose a friend because she has the heart of a lion that would put most men to shame. Rose once went to Holy Communion in a Novus Ordo church. Instead of joining the standing queue and sticking out her hands like someone queuing for a McDonald's burger, she knelt, as was her custom, placed her hands prayerfully together, opened her mouth, and put out her tongue. This was the cue for the parish priest to signal to two large white men in the front pew, who, approaching Rose from behind, placed a hand under each of her armpits and lifted her to her feet. Rose responded by silently lifting her arms above her head, slipping out of the men's grasp, and landing back on her knees. The two goons again lifted her to her feet. Rose repeated her maneuver and once again slipped out of their grasp onto her knees. The curate, who was distributing Holy Communion on the other side of the church, observing this outrage, crossed behind his parish priest and placed the host on Rose's tongue before returning to his place. When Catholics devoutly kneel to receive Holy Communion on the tongue, the body language of modernist priests is sometimes very revealing. A few almost throw the host at the communicant or shove it into their mouth aggressively. One can also occasionally witness the reverse in an exchange between a good priest and a modernist communicant. I was told by a priest friend about a traditional Mass at Lourdes, where a would-be communicant became angry, foul-mouthed, and aggressive during the Mass because the priest refused to place the host in his hand. These stories illustrate something very important. Modernists don't merely disbelieve in the real presence, they loathe it with an intensity that is manifestly demonic, a white-hot hatred that can only come from the bowels of hell. In fact, I'm not sure that they actually disbelieve in the real presence, for why would you loathe something with that intensity if you did not believe in it? The modernist hatred for the real presence mirrors the demon's hatred for the incarnation. Such priests have evil hearts and are in danger of hell, because hating the real presence, they have no life in them. The loving presence of God feels only like the eye of judgment out of condemnation to the reprobate, said St. John Henry Newman. In classical art, the devil is sometimes drawn without knee joints. The implications are self-evident. Many suspect that Pope Francis is a modernist. From here we see a man who grovels in a faux humility before anything that moves, yet stands proudly erect like some stone-carved symbol before the Blessed Sacrament. Contrast the above with the priest, who in 2019, risking his own life, rushed into the raging inferno that was Notre Dame de Paris to rescue the Blessed Sacrament. This priest, having discovered the Blessed Sacrament and standing in the burning building, recounted that he begged Jesus, who was truly present in the host, to fight the flames and preserve the building dedicated to his mother. For all we know, that faithful priest may have done more to save the cathedral than hundreds of Parisian firefighters. It would be preposterous to address the issue of modernism in the Church without speaking about Vatican II. The Church had been struggling to throw off the deadly virus of modernism for over a century. Vatican II provided the opportunity for the rebels, modernists themselves or those influenced to some degree by this heresy, to face off against traditionalists. The ambiguities in the documents of Vatican II, interpreted in this light, make perfect sense. They were like ceasefire treaties, armistices drawn up and formally agreed upon between warring factions. However, one would not be going too far to state that the Church is tradition. Thus, to compromise with tradition was and is self-destructive for the Church. Consequently, Vatican II opened the floodgates, and modernism spread rapidly through the Church's bloodstream like rattlesnake venom. Pope Benedict XVI, I believe, began to see this in his later years. He tried to row back on the appalling damage done by trying to promote yet another armistice. This one was entitled The Hermeneutic of Continuity, which basically meant that we should interpret Vatican II in the light of tradition. But our revolutionaries were not interested in signing any new armistices. They had already made up too much progress in their assault upon the citadel. Tragically, since Vatican II, most of the seas of the Western civilizations, with a handful of glorious exceptions, have been filled by Rome with dreary, vacuous, bog-standing modernists, ecumeniacs who are more concerned about not upsetting the heretical loon who self-styles him the Archbishop of Canterbury than they are in preaching the one true faith. If our post-conciliar shepherds actually say anything, it is either some social gospel platitude or lowest common denominator Christian bromide. Under the tutelage of these hirelings, Christ's body in the British Isles has steadily hemorrhaged away. By peddling modernist drivel in our schools, these men have alienated the vast majority of our youth. Prior to Vatican II and the new Mass, 80% of the children leaving Catholic schools practiced their faith. Today, that number has dropped to 3%. The much-vaunted New Pentecost is apparently nowhere near as awesome as the first. Our post-conciliar shepherds have decimated our mass attendance, which is now well under half of what it was before Vatican II, and emptied our seminaries. Those, that is, that they haven't already closed. They have reduced Catholic baptism by 50% and Catholic marriages by a whopping 2/3. Our liturgy in many parishes is more akin to a teddy bear's picnic organized by Ronnie McDonald than anything anyone could just truly describe as divine liturgy. As one commentator put it, quote, "Instead of worshiping God Almighty, we now worship God Almighty." The church that was once the patron of the greatest music the world had ever known now employs elderly hippies who gig about strumming guitars to trite 60s pop ditties. This they pompously and ludicrously call music ministry. Many of our beautiful and once much-loved churches have been turned into ugly, unloved, relativistic worship spaces that look more like waiting rooms of budget airlines than churches. Art, music, architecture, sculpture, and rituals have all been so dumbed down that it is all but compulsory to be a complete Philistine to attend Mass regularly in many Novus-Ordo parishes. We have lost the working classes and our intelligentsia. Our congregations, aging and predominantly female, are served by elderly clergy, and most of these men have never seen a priestly vocation in their parish. Converts to the faith are down 70%. Put another way, for every 10 people who found conversion to the Catholic faith attractive prior to Vatican II, only 3 do today. Before Vatican II, converts who came into the church died Catholics. Today, an estimated 85% of our CIA converts leave within 5 years. But even that is not the end of this miserable story, because many converts these days don't in fact actually become Catholics. They are Roman Protestants led in by modernists who have sold out the RCIA programs for their own ends. One high-profile convert stated that the church's teaching on the James Martin sin was wrong. Its teaching on contraception plain silly, and then added, as if it still mattered, that she did not believe that any pope was infallible, particularly the present one. She was referring, at the time, to John Paul II. One of the strangest changes following Vatican II is in the nature of communications from prelates. If one wrote to a bishop prior to the council, one received a long, informative reply full of Catholic wisdom. Write to a bishop today, and you receive a one-sentence stock reply along the lines of, "Thank you for your letter, I have noted its contents." On the rare occasion that he writes more, he merely strings together post-conciliar episcopo babble in a semblance of rational thought. The Novus Ordo Church in the UK is currently in terminal meltdown, losing approximately 100,000 souls every 3 years. Humanly speaking, we will not have a church in this country worth speaking about in 20 years' time. Immigration is the only thing keeping afloat our numbers. Predatory James Martin types have been ordained and promoted to high office in the church, with the inevitable evil deeds of the most vulnerable altar servers. Priests in America were at one point dying of the noteworthy affliction of the 1980s at over 4 times the national average rate, and there's absolutely no reason to believe that England was significantly better. These scandals that have so blighted the post-conciliar church are also directly linked to modernism. The church has from apostolic times required priests to be celibate, to sacrifice the good of the intimacy of a woman, a wife, family, and children for the sake of the kingdom. Now the modernist worships the God within. As G.K. Chesterton pointed out, when Jones worships the God within, Jones worships Jones. The question we need to be asking ourselves is this: what sort of man would be prepared to sacrifice his right to the good of taking a wife and having a family and children of his own to serve such an ever-changing, ephemeral, banal divinity? The answer is both simple and self-evident: a James Martin type, someone who had no desire for a wife in the first place. Professional external agents who have studied the explosion of this problem by priests since Vatican II have all come to the same conclusion. Over 90% of those harmed were adolescent males. So we are dealing here not with those who prey upon the most young, as corrupt bishops dishonestly insist on telling us, but with James Martin types of a particularly predatory kind. Why do our bishops insist on lying about the problem? One must assume that it is because many of them are themselves compromised. It was not difficult to note that when American bishops, for example, put in place safeguarding measures for minors on the insistence of Pope John Paul II, the one and only group of churchmen excluded from their oversight were themselves the bishops. The problem is further exacerbated by the Novus Ordo, which minimizes the Mass as sacrifice. Since it is not explicit to the priest that he is offering sacrifice, his very raison d'etre is negated. This has too often led them to turn on themselves in a form of narcissism, aided by versus populum, and in the worst-case scenarios, they become monsters capable of harming their own flock. It is clear that unless and until the Church rids herself of the heresy of modernism and expels this lethal affliction totally from her body, the faithful will continue to be regularly scandalized by one of the main symptoms of the sickness, the physical harm done to young men by modernist clerics. Is it then all doom and gloom? Are there no reasons for hope? On the contrary, one of the most obvious facets of modernism is its sterility. It is a quintessential barren fig tree cursed by our blessed Lord. It is unfruitful on every front: marriage, children, families, religious vocations, and priests. It cannot even produce orthodox teachers able and committed to passing on the faith to the next generation in our own schools. Further, the Novus Ordo Church is contracepting itself out of existence as eagerly as any group of secularists. We hear much of the shortage of priests, but even that is a distorted story. The fact is that the average post-conciliar priest in the West has fewer Catholics to minister to than its pre-conciliar counterpart. The Novus Ordo Church simply has a shortage of Mass-going Catholics, period. Further, a survey carried out in 2019 revealed that 70% of those who do go to Mass do not believe in the real presence. Put another way, 7 out of 10 people at Novus Ordo Masses are Sinos, Catholics in name only. The Novus Ordo Church is patently circling the plug hole. Traditionalists were reduced to a rump after the tsunami of Vatican II slammed into the church, but are so fruitful that traditionalist communities are springing up everywhere again. In the USA, for example, traditionalist communities have grown from approximately 20 in 1991 to over 400 in 2019. That's a growth of over 2,000%. The SSPX, the Priestly Confraternity of St. Peter, the Institute of Good Shepherd, diocesan priests making use of Benedict XVI indult, independent priests, and many others are now offering the classical Roman rite, the rite of our forefathers, saints, and martyrs. In these traditionalist communities, marriages are abundant, as are religious and priestly vocations. Indeed, building and staffing seminaries fast enough to keep up with vocations is the challenge now facing many traditionalist orders. Youth and children are also to be found in plenty. In the congregation where this writer worships, for example, over 25% of the community is under the age of 10. One final fact worth noting is that whereas elderly ladies are a disproportionately large number of most Novus Ordo communities, traditional congregations are usually far more balanced, with at least 50% being men. If there's one maxim that is beyond all dispute, a mere truism, in fact, is that the fruitful shall inherit the earth. And so what is it that the next Pope must address in that? The elephant in the room. That the great experiment of having the Church open its windows to the world to listen to the wisdom of the world, as described by the popes and bishops of Vatican II, that experiment has failed. There are no truly traditionalist candidates for Pope at this time. Not one of them. Because if they were actually traditional in their leanings, they would understand, and they would embrace the hard truth. That something at that council went horribly wrong, and it's not just the implementation, that there are problems within the documents themselves. They must fully confront the scourge of modernism in the Church. I'm curious what you have to say about this, so let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. Certainly helps. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.